Bruce Lee wasn't just a martial artist. He was a force of nature. A man whose speed left opponents frozen, whose power defied his size, and whose body looked more like a sculpted weapon than flesh and bone. When people watched him move, it was as if they were seeing something beyond human. A fighter who seemed faster, stronger, and sharper than anyone alive. But Bruce Lee wasn't born that way. There was no genetic miracle, no secret shortcut. What made him appear superhuman was a brutal, relentless training regime that broke down the limits of the human body. He fused ancient martial arts with cutting-edge science, mixed Eastern philosophy with Western strength training, and pushed himself to levels of pain most athletes would never endure. This is the untold story of how Bruce Lee built himself from an ordinary man into something extraordinary, the brutal training that made him superhuman. Welcome to Back to Boxing. We usually explore the brutal training routines of boxing legends, but today we're diving into something different, because what Bruce Lee built wasn't just useful for martial artists. His methods shaped the way all fighters, from boxers to MMA athletes, approach training. And to understand how, we need to look at the philosophy that drove him. Before we dive into the brutal specifics, you need to understand something crucial about Bruce Lee's approach to training. This wasn't just about building muscle or learning techniques. For Bruce, training was a philosophy of constant improvement, what he called the process of becoming. Bruce Lee began his martial arts journey at age 13, studying Wing Chun under the legendary Ip Man. But even from the beginning, Bruce was different. While other students practiced the traditional forms, Bruce questioned everything. Why do we hold our hands this way? Why do we stand in this position? What if there's a better way? This questioning mindset became the foundation of everything Bruce would later develop. He approached training like a scientist, constantly experimenting, measuring results and refining techniques. He kept detailed training logs, recording not just what he did, but how his body responded, what worked, what didn't, and why. When Bruce moved to America in 1959, he was a skinny 18-year-old weighing just 128 pounds. Photos from this period show a lean but unremarkable physique. What happened over the next decade was one of the most dramatic physical transformations in recorded history. Bruce's training philosophy was built on three core principles that would guide everything he did. First, functionality over form. Every exercise, every technique had to serve a practical purpose. Second, constant adaptation. His training was never the same from week to week. Third, maximum intensity. Bruce believed that unless you pushed your body to its absolute limits, you weren't really training at all. These principles would drive him to develop training methods that were considered radical, dangerous, and in some cases, impossible. The daily grind. Bruce Lee's typical training day would break most modern athletes. He trained 7 days a week, often twice a day, and logged anywhere from 6 to 12 hours in total. But don't mistake it for blind repetition. Every single minute was mapped out with military precision and carried out with scientific focus. His mornings began at 6 a.m. with a 2-mile run. But this wasn't some light jog around the block. Bruce alternated between sprints and steady pacing, pushing his lungs through both aerobic and anaerobic zones. He believed unpredictability in training forged unpredictability in combat, and on the street or in the ring, that meant survival. After running, he transitioned into a brutal hour of flexibility training. This wasn't gentle yoga or casual stretching. This was systematic torture designed to bend his body past its normal limits. He performed weighted stretches, partner-assisted stretches, and long isometric holds until his muscles trembled with effort. He could hold the splits for up to 30 minutes at a time. And he even designed a device he called the rack, a homemade contraption that forced his legs apart while he trained other muscle groups. The goal wasn't just flexibility, but what Bruce called active flexibility. The ability to kick at extreme ranges and still generate explosive power, something that stunned fighters who sparred with him. Once his body was wrung out, Bruce turned inward. He spent 30 minutes on meditation and visualization. He pictured himself executing flawless techniques, imagined overcoming obstacles, and rehearsed fights in his mind until they felt real. Decades later, sports science would prove him right. Mental rehearsal can improve performance by more than 30%. Bruce was doing it in the 1960s, and this was just the morning. For Bruce, these hours were only the warm-up. The real work began in the afternoon when his body was already fatigued, and that's where he pushed himself into the superhuman territory few athletes have ever reached: the weight room revolution. When Bruce Lee started lifting weights in the early 1960s, it was martial arts heresy. Traditional martial artists believed that weight training would make you muscle-bound and slow. Bruce didn't just ignore this conventional wisdom, he shattered it completely. But Bruce's approach to weight training was unlike anything anyone had seen before. While bodybuilders focused on isolation exercises and perfect form, Bruce developed what he called power chain training, compound movements that built strength throughout entire kinetic chains. His signature exercise was something he invented called the dragon flag. Lying on his back on a bench, Bruce would raise his entire body until only his shoulder blades touched the bench, hold this position, then slowly lower himself while keeping his body perfectly straight. He could perform 50 repetitions of this exercise that most people can't do even once. Bruce's squat routine was equally legendary. He would perform what he called breathing squats, 20 repetitions with maximum weight, taking 3 deep breaths between each rep. The weight would remain on his back for over 5 minutes, with the last few reps performed in a state of near oxygen deprivation. Witnesses described watching Bruce's face turn purple as he pushed through the final repetitions. His deadlift training was perhaps the most brutal. Bruce would perform a pyramid system, starting with 135 pounds and adding weight each set until he reached his maximum, then immediately dropping back down without rest. The entire sequence took 45 minutes and left him so exhausted he could barely walk. But perhaps most revolutionary was Bruce's approach to speed training with weights. He developed exercises specifically designed to increase the rate of force development, how quickly his muscles could generate maximum power. One of his favorites was the speed bench press, where he would use 70% of his maximum weight, but move it as fast as physically possible. The results were measurable and shocking. Bruce's bench press increased from 125 pounds to 340 pounds. His squat went from 95 pounds to 400 pounds. But more importantly, his speed increased dramatically. By the late 1960s, Bruce could perform techniques so fast they couldn't be seen by the human eye. The conditioning crucible. If Bruce's weight training was ahead of its time, his conditioning methods were downright brutal. He believed technique meant nothing without the body to sustain it, and his routines pushed human endurance to breaking point. Conditioning for Bruce wasn't just fitness, it was survival training. His heavy bag work became the stuff of legend. Bruce kept multiple bags of varying weights and densities and cycled through them to build both explosive power and unshakable stamina. One of his signature drills was 1,000 kicks on the heavy bag, 100 kicks per leg across 10 different techniques. It sounds doable until you realize Bruce's strikes were so violent they often split 300-pound bags wide open. He also created a regimen he called the crucible, 30 minutes of non-stop combat movement, shadowboxing, kicks, punches, and relentless footwork with no pause for recovery. The pace was so extreme he could lose 10 to 15 pounds of water weight in a single session. Sometimes he performed it in heated rooms, deliberately simulating the chaos of fighting under suffocating, hostile conditions. Then there was his grip training, which bordered on inhuman. Bruce would use his infamous grip machine with crushing intensity, applying so much force that it bent and wore out equipment most athletes couldn't even budge. He trained his forearms and hands until they were like steel cables, capable of bone-crushing power. He could knock out one-finger push-ups, and his grip was so strong he could crack walnuts between his fingers. His core training was no less savage. He performed V-ups, hanging sit-ups, side bends, and his signature dragon flag, an exercise so brutal it became legendary. These were done in marathon fashion, with hundreds of reps daily, until his midsection looked less like muscle and more like armor plating. But perhaps most punishing of all was his deliberate training for pain tolerance. Bruce subjected himself to ice baths for 30 minutes at a stretch, seared his body in saunas over 200 degrees, and practiced advanced breathing drills to stress test his lungs. To him, mastering discomfort wasn't optional. It was the ultimate conditioning, both for combat and for life itself. The science of speed. Bruce Lee's speed bordered on the supernatural. His jab was recorded at 1/5 of a second, faster than the human eye can follow. His famous 1-inch punch could launch at 120 miles per hour across a space smaller than your palm. But none of this was natural talent. Bruce engineered his speed through methods decades ahead of their time. He understood that real speed wasn't about moving faster, but about eliminating wasted motion. Using high-speed film, he studied his techniques frame by frame, stripping away every unnecessary movement. This became his principle of economy of motion, the backbone of Jeet Kune Do. His training often started with shadow fighting. Not casual shadow boxing, but 30-minute bursts of all-out speed, performed with weighted gear to overload his nervous system. Then came the speed bag pyramid, bags of different sizes and weights arranged at various heights, forcing him to adapt instantly to changing rhythms and distances. Bruce also trained reaction time in ways that bordered on insane. He sparred blindfolded against partners armed with wooden swords, honing his ability to react through sound and air displacement. Tests showed his reflexes at 5/100ths of a second, almost twice as fast as an average human. But perhaps his most radical insight was what he called emotional speed. Bruce knew hesitation was the enemy, so he used meditation and visualization to erase the gap between thought and action. He struck without pause, his body firing before his mind even caught up. The results were undeniable. Witnesses saw him hit a target and retract his fist before opponents even registered the first movement. He could blast a 300-pound heavy bag into the ceiling, then strike it again before it swung back. His speed wasn't just fast. By conventional standards, it was impossible. The mind-body connection. What separated Bruce Lee from other athletes wasn't just his physical training, it was his revolutionary understanding of the mind-body connection. Bruce trained his brain with the same intensity and precision that he trained his muscles, developing mental capabilities that enhanced every aspect of his performance. His meditation practice was rigorous and systematic. Bruce would spend 2 to 3 hours daily in various forms of mental training, from traditional sitting meditation to moving meditation during martial arts practice. But this wasn't passive relaxation. He used meditation to develop what he called one-pointed awareness, the ability to focus his entire mind on a single task with laser-like intensity. Bruce studied neurology and psychology extensively, reading everything he could find on how the brain controls movement. He was particularly fascinated by motor learning and began incorporating scientific principles into his training decades before sports science became mainstream. He also developed visualization techniques that were incredibly detailed and specific. Before attempting any new move, Bruce would mentally rehearse it hundreds of times, visualizing every contraction, every angle, every variation. He claimed he could learn techniques mentally before ever physically attempting them. His pain management was equally sophisticated. Bruce understood that pain was largely a mental phenomenon, and he trained himself to control his response to it. He could push through sessions that would hospitalize most athletes while maintaining perfect focus and technique. His approach to fear was just as revolutionary. Instead of trying to eliminate it, he learned to use fear as fuel. He would deliberately place himself in uncomfortable or frightening situations, from facing much larger opponents to performing dangerous stunts, and turn adrenaline into heightened awareness and sharper performance. The results were evident in every aspect of his life. Bruce's mental control was so complete that he could raise or lower his heart rate at will, control his breathing to the point of appearing dead, and maintain perfect focus during the most intense physical exertion. The breaking point. By the early 1970s, Bruce Lee had achieved something unprecedented in human physical development. His body fat was measured at 1%, a level typically seen only in extreme medical conditions. His cardiovascular fitness was off the charts, with a resting heart rate of 32 beats per minute. His strength-to-weight ratio was comparable to elite gymnasts, while his speed exceeded that of professional boxers. But this level of physical perfection came with a terrible cost. Bruce was training his body beyond its natural limits, and the stress was beginning to show. He suffered from chronic back pain due to a weight training injury that he refused to let heal properly. His metabolism was so accelerated that he had difficulty maintaining body weight despite consuming over 5,000 calories daily. The intensity of his training was literally consuming his body. Friends and family members expressed concern about his appearance. At 5'7" and 135 pounds, Bruce looked almost skeletal, despite his incredible muscle definition. His body was so lean that every vein, every muscle fiber was visible beneath his skin. His final training routine, developed in 1972, was perhaps the most intense physical regimen ever documented. It included 6 hours of martial arts practice, 2 hours of weight training, 2 hours of cardiovascular work, and 2 hours of flexibility training daily. The total caloric expenditure was estimated at over 6,000 calories per day, more than most people consume. Bruce's perfectionism drove him to constantly increase the intensity and duration of his training. He would often train until physical exhaustion, then continue training mentally through visualization and meditation. Sleep became secondary to training. Bruce would often function on 3 to 4 hours of sleep per night, claiming that proper training eliminated the need for excessive rest. The warning signs were there, but Bruce ignored them. His body was operating at the absolute limits of human capability, sustained only by his incredible willpower and mental discipline. Conclusion: on July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee collapsed and died at the age of 32. The official cause of death was listed as brain edema, but the real cause was simpler. Bruce Lee had pushed the human body beyond its limits and paid the ultimate price. But Bruce's legacy isn't his death. It's the revolution he created in human physical development. He became superhuman not through genetics or luck, but through the most brutal, systematic, and scientifically advanced training program ever devised. The question isn't whether Bruce Lee was superhuman. The question is, how far are you willing to go to unlock your own potential? The training methods are documented, the principles are proven, and the path is clear. The only question that remains is whether you have the courage to walk it. Remember, as Bruce Lee himself said, if you always put limits on everything you do, physical or anything else, it will spread into your work and into your life. There are no limits. There are only plateaus, and you must not stay there. You must go beyond them. The choice is yours. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about this? Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.